The core claim is that the 1965 and 1966 Cadillacs came astonishingly close to flawless, and the unexpected part is how they earned that reputation, not through excess, but through restraint, engineering discipline, and a quiet technology lead that rivals did not quickly match. Even as sales surged to roughly 181,000 in 1965 and nearly 197,000 in 1966 at Detroit's expanded Clark Street plant, a figure that shocked contemporaries and set the stage for the last true standard of the world legacy many enthusiasts reference today. The story begins earlier than many expect. In the early 1960s, when Lincoln's clean, squared-off 1961 Continental forced General Motors styling to rethink flamboyance, and by the mid-60s, Cadillac answered with a design approach that looked measured rather than Baroque, while quietly reorganizing its fundamentals with a new perimeter frame, a broad and coherent lineup from Calais to Fleetwood 75, and a driveline pairing of a torquey 429 cubic inch V8 with the then advanced turbo Hydramatic 3-speed. Featuring the rare variable pitch stator, technology that allowed both velvet creep and urgent launch, and which would become a calling card of refinement in these model years. Let's explore what made these Cadillacs not just desirable, but authoritative in their day, because the hidden reasons combine industrial scale, detail engineering, and a careful move toward a purer form language that viewers will recognize as prescient. You'll see how one widely criticized flaw in 1966, rear bulbs awkwardly accessed only after bumper removal, ironically underscores how far Cadillac took its surface purity, and you'll hear why that compromise mattered less than the car's structural gains, power delivery, and comfort technology that quietly set the pace for the segment. The Clark Street facility in Detroit, known as Cadillac Assembly or Detroit Assembly, was both the cathedral and the fortress of this achievement, a plant dating back to the early 1920s, whose workforce swelled into the tens of thousands, and whose output passed 192,000 units as early as 1962, before cresting again later in the decade. In 1965, after a major expansion that added roughly 500,000 square feet, daily throughput targets reached about 800 cars, with around 10,000 employees on site, an industrial context that explains how Cadillac met record demand while keeping finish quality and consistency. Why did Cadillac's styling pivot succeed so completely in 1965 and 1966? And how could a brand known for fins become the master of restraint almost overnight? The truth is that design evolution began in studios years earlier, in clay models and large airbrush renderings, where future leaders like Wayne Caddy learned to control volume breaks and light highlights the way a coach builder would. Caddy would later become a central Cadillac exterior designer, and contemporary accounts of his trajectory inside General Motors illuminate how Bill Mitchell's leadership prized strong themes, including vertical light signatures that would become a Cadillac hallmark, bridging earlier fin drama and later upright elegance. Bill Mitchell, GM's styling vice president, had an instinct for visual identity that extended to lighting architecture, and 1965 introduced Cadillac's first stacked headlamps, a vertical motif that Mitchell often tied to purposeful radiator forms from American racing history, such as the upright cooling faces on Miller race cars, giving Cadillac a face that read technical rather than ornamental. That vertical stack also foreshadowed decades of Cadillac lamp signatures that prioritized strong night identity, which viewers can recognize as a through line from mid-60s sedans to later Seville and beyond. Beneath the cleaner exterior sat a fully new box section perimeter frame that replaced earlier X-frames, a shift of real consequence because it improved side impact protection, eased cabin packaging, and enhanced ride isolation. Cadillac's own materials for 1965 detail the change, and model literature for Fleetwood 60 Special on the stretched C-body emphasizes the longer wheelbase and dignified stance that the perimeter architecture supported, giving the cars an unmistakable glide on American highways, as well as more predictable handling on secondary roads. Power was both abundant and civilized. For 1964, Cadillac had enlarged its familiar V8 to 429 cubic inches, or about 7.0 liters, by using a 4.13-inch bore and 4.0-inch stroke. And in the 1965 and 1966 cars, that engine made a factory-quoted 340 horsepower, or roughly 254 kilowatts, with about 408 pound-feet of torque, or roughly 651 newton-meters, pulled smoothly through hydraulic lifters and fed by a 4-barrel carburetor that emphasized progressive response rather than sudden surge, a hallmark of a true luxury tune. That refined torque curve worked in concert with GM's turbo Hydramatic 3-speed automatic, known inside Buick and Cadillac circles for the switch pitch converter, whose variable angle stator changed vane incidence electrically under throttle to vary torque multiplication. Ease into the pedal, and the stator chose a coarse pitch for reduced slip and serene progress during city trundling at, say, 20 to 30 miles per hour, or roughly 30 to 50 kilometers per hour, but squeeze hard for an on-ramp and the stator snapped to a finer angle, raising stall speed and torque multiplication to deliver confident merges up to 60 miles per hour, or roughly 100 kilometers per hour, a flexibility that reviewers of the day lauded as both the most advanced and the most seamless of any American luxury car. Viewers might ask, was it quick? Period performance figures for a 429 engine DeVille or Fleetwood with turbo Hydramatic report 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 8 to 9 seconds, or roughly 13 to 14.5 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour, with a top speed around 127 miles per hour or just above 204 kilometers per hour. Numbers that, while not sports car grade, established effortless passing at 70 to 80 miles per hour, or about 112 to 129 kilometers per hour, exactly the domain where the luxury sedans live. Comfort technology is where Cadillac's quiet leadership is most pronounced in these years. In 1964, Cadillac made a bold decision to offer only its automatic comfort control climate system with air conditioning, eliminating manual AC entirely, and by 1965 that system matured into the standard by which others were judged, using a vacuum-modulated servo and an amplifier to blend air and maintain the set temperature automatically, a user experience far more seamless than knob twiddling and notably consistent in blower logic, with multiple automatic fan steps for subtle transitions from medium to high flow. That choice had competitive implications. Pontiac would get automatic climate control by 1965, and Lincoln would add its own automatic temperature control in 1966. Cadillac therefore held roughly a one-year exclusive inside GM and stayed at least a model year ahead of its chief domestic rival in this comfort technology, which is why many owners recall the mid-60s Cadillacs as the most set-it-and-forget-it luxury cabins of the era, when driven across long distances like 200 to 300 miles, or roughly 320 to 480 kilometers on interstates. Cabin design advanced in parallel with broad low dashboards, horizontal speedometers, and wraparound themes that anticipated cockpit-like environments decades later. Factory brochures for 1965 detailed the breadth of the interior catalog, while Fleetwood 60 Special and later Brougham trims added walnut accents, rear reading lamps, and for certain years, lighted writing tables, features that spoke to the owner-driven but chauffeur-capable dual mission of Cadillac's top sedans. Twilight Sentinel automatic headlamp control, a convenience feature that turned lights on or off based on ambient light, combined with cornering lamps and the vertical stacked headlamps to produce both safety and signature. And these details mattered in the evening commute, moving at 30 to 40 miles per hour, or roughly 50 to 65 kilometers per hour, through Detroit suburbs or on Woodward Avenue, an environment Cadillac owned in the mid-60s as the American Luxury Boulevard. The model range in 1965 encompassed value-priced Calais sedans and coupes, mid-series DeVilles in multiple body styles, including convertibles, Fleetwood 60 Special sedans with a longer 133-inch wheelbase, or roughly 3,378 millimeters, and the Fleetwood 75 limousine and formal sedans that stretched to overall lengths past 243 inches, or roughly 6,190 millimeters. Factory literature establishes overall lengths for most models around 224 inches, or roughly 5,690 millimeters, with the 60 Special reaching 227.5 inches, or roughly 5,778 millimeters, underlining just how commanding these cars were in traffic. In 1966, Cadillac refined the theme rather than reinventing it. Grilles grew subtler, side sculpture calmed marginally, and the rear lamp treatment became infamous for a serviceability quirk. On many 1966 models accessed the taillight bulbs required removal of the rear bumper assembly, a process that owners and mechanics remember as a few dozen minutes of wrench work, rather than a quick trunk liner peel, which is why this flaw is still cited in service discussions as a cautionary tale about prioritizing pure form lines over maintenance ease. But that flaw also shows Cadillac's commitment in these years to cohesive surfaces. The desire to hide fasteners and lamp service openings reflects a brand chasing quietness, not just in sound but in sight. And in practice, most owners accepted the trade given the car's overall durability and the driveline's reliability. Indeed, Cadillac's 429, used from 1964 through 1967, has a reputation for stout bottom ends and cool running thanks to improved crank coring and accessory layout changes introduced in the early 60s redesign. A moment on transmission specifics helps explain why these cars feel so alive at small throttle, yet never jumpy in a parking lot. The turbo Hydramatic 3 speeds, variable pitch stator changes converter characteristics under an electrical signal tied to throttle position, giving a low-speed gentle creep when stator pitch is coarse, which makes easing into a parallel spot at 2 to 3 miles per hour, or roughly 3 to 5 kilometers per hour a breeze, and then, with a deeper pedal, delivering a rapid rise in engine speed into the fat of the torque curve for decisive movement. Period and retrospective technical summaries identify 1964 through 1967 as the primary window for these switch pitch units in Buick, Oldsmobile, and Cadillac applications. Cadillac's switch to a perimeter frame brought measurable benefits. Owners noticed reduced floor heat and less resonance at highway speed, which on concrete at 70 miles per hour, or about 112 kilometers per hour, could otherwise set up a droning cabin in earlier X-frame cars. And the new frame also presented better mounting points that enabled further muffling advances, including a coaxial resonator that Cadillac highlighted in 1966 for its ability to cancel specific exhaust pitches and render the car among the quietest luxury sedans yet built in the United States. Body dimensions reinforced that sense of poise. The 1965 Fleetwood 60 Specials, length of approximately 227.5 inches, or roughly 5,778 millimeters, and curb weights, often in the 4,800 to 5,000 pound range, or roughly 2,180 to 2,260 kilograms made for a planted ride, and that wheelbase of roughly 133 inches, or about 3,378 millimeters, delivered long, gentle pitch motions that owners and reviewers equated with first-class rail travel rather than the choppiness of shorter wheelbase sedans. A single statistic can anchor how strong Cadillac's market position was in these 2 years. In 1965, the division sold about 181,000 cars, and in 1966, nearly 197,000. Record results driven by the expanded Clark Street plant and by a product that matched or exceeded buyer expectations. Numbers that matter because they came during a period when the domestic luxury battlefield intensified, with Lincoln and Chrysler's Imperial offering serious alternatives. Yet, while the market grew sharper, Cadillac kept a quiet lead where it counted. Automatic climate control was normalized for Cadillac buyers as early as 1964, rather than a rare option, with refinements through 1966 that improved blower step logic and servo reliability, while Lincoln only introduced its automatic system in 1966 and still offered manual AC as a lower-cost choice, meaning Cadillac's customer base adapted earlier to set-and-forget luxury and expected it as part of the brand promise. Design studios in the mid-60s also refined Cadillac's proportions with a keen awareness of light. Wayne Caddy and his peers sketched and modeled cars whose fender planes caught daylight in long, continuous sweeps, eliminating the busy side scallops of earlier years, and the stacked headlamps gave a strongly vertical datum that visually lowered the hood and made the cars appear more modern. While keeping a uniquely American signature, evidence that Mitchell Studios were translating race-bred upright radiator inspiration into road car identity without copying European forms. Underhood serviceability improved with the early 60s engine rework. A front accessory drive housed in an aluminum casting made water pump and power steering service more straightforward, and the alternator, adopted in the early 60s refresh, reduced charging issues during low-speed driving with lights and climate control on, a practicality that mattered for urban owners idling in traffic at 5 to 10 miles per hour, or roughly 8 to 16 kilometers per hour with full electrical loads. One could argue that 1965 marks the exact crest of Cadillac's traditional engineering: perimeter frame, rear-wheel drive, big cube torque, and analog comfort systems perfected, before regulatory changes and the fuel crises of the 1970s forced a pivot. Wayne Caddy's later recollections of Cadillac and GM leadership navigating design, bumper standards, and powertrain experiments illustrate how the company's ensuing decades would be more turbulent, which is precisely why the 1965 and 1966 cars feel like a high-water mark in hindsight. Drivers from the period recall personal moments that humanize the numbers. A DeVille owner in suburban Detroit might leave Clark Street at dusk, Twilight Sentinel bringing the lamps alive automatically as the speedometer needle glides to 60 miles per hour, or roughly 97 kilometers per hour on the Lodge Freeway. The automatic climate holding a steady cabin temperature as the turbo Hydramatic slips through second gear almost imperceptibly, then into third at about 35 to 40 miles per hour, or roughly 56 to 65 kilometers per hour under light throttle. These qualitative impressions align with the technical descriptions of the stator's dual-pitch behavior and the perimeter frame's isolation. A question often asked is why Cadillac's big cars of these years feel so coherent on poor pavement compared to some contemporaries. The answer lies in frame tuning, long wheelbase, high unsprung-to-sprung mass ratio favoring isolation, and careful muffling of exhaust and intake pulses, including the 1966 coaxial resonator update that canceled resonant bands owners would have heard between 30 and 50 miles per hour, or roughly 50 to 80 kilometers per hour in earlier systems. Changes documented in period technical and enthusiast analyses. Production discipline supported this experience. Detroit Assembly, the Clark Street plant, had decades of practice building Cadillacs exclusively since the early 1920s, with bodies supplied by Fisher Fleetwood and powertrains arriving from Tonawanda and Saginaw. Casting operations before installation, a vertically integrated process that stabilized quality during the record-setting mid-60s volumes and kept Cadillac's reputation intact as the standard of the world for buyers who equated quiet, accuracy, and durability with luxury. Lineup strategy was another quiet strength. Calais models put buyers into Cadillac ride and structure at lower price points. DeVille's loaded popular options and body styles. Fleetwood 60 Special delivered the formal owner-driven sedan with the longest wheelbase short of limousines, and Fleetwood 75 covered formal sedan and limousine duties for livery and executive users, a matrix that ensured a broad sales base without diluting the brand's top-end presence on boulevards in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. The switch-pitch turbo Hydramatic deserves a further note because it is a directly felt technology. Technical sources identify 1964 to 1967 as key years, and Cadillac's implementation stands out because it is paired with a high-torque, low-RPM V8 that never sounds strained, so the stator's shift to high-angle under load delivers a swelling surge rather than a harsh flare. Translating to safe short, merges onto freeways in 6 to 8 seconds to 60 miles per hour, or roughly 10 to 13 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour, well within contemporary expectations for premium sedans. In 1966, Cadillac's tail lamp service quirk attracted outsized attention because nothing else about the cars felt inconvenient. Forum and service manual references confirm that bumper removal was required to access bulbs on certain models, a time-consuming but infrequent service, and this anecdote tends to surface precisely because the rest of the ownership experience, from cold starts on winter mornings around 20 degrees Fahrenheit or roughly -6 degrees Celsius, to summer cruises at 80 degrees Fahrenheit or roughly 27 degrees Celsius with comfort control holding steady, was so uneventful. Dimensionally, the cars fill a lane with authority. DeVille and Calais overall lengths around 224 inches, or roughly 5,690 millimeters, and widths near 80 inches, or about 2,030 millimeters, produce a stance that reads Palace on wheels, while Fleetwood 60 Special adds those extra inches of wheelbase for rear legroom and a more dignified backlight angle, cues that projected gravitas at curbside in front of hotels and theaters throughout the mid-60s. Even the basic gauges tell a story. Horizontal speedometers favored in these years underscore the car's linear low-sweep aesthetic and allowed a long pointer with high resolution between 30 and 70 miles per hour, or roughly 50 to 112 kilometers per hour, where most driving occurred, mirroring Cadillac's focus on subjective control and calm, rather than rapid arc movement toward triple digits, despite the car's capacity to run beyond 120 miles per hour, or roughly 193 kilometers per hour. And to return to the market context, it is pivotal to remember how many buyers were convinced by the total package. The record sales of roughly 181,000 in 1965 and about 197,000 in 1966 did not happen by advertising alone. They happened because a refined V8, a genuinely advanced automatic, quiet chassis tuning, and credible automatic climate control delivered daily returns, while the new design language announced modernity without shock, an equilibrium that rivals could not match at the same scale in those exact years. Design lineage is clearer if one sees the stacked headlamps as the bridge between fins and later crisp vertical themes. Bill Mitchell's studios, informed by American racing and a taste for tailored forms, partnered with future Cadillac leads like Wayne Caddy to set up the brand for later 70s landmarks like the Bustleback Seville. But in 1965 and 1966, the immediate result was a sedan and coupe family that felt resolved from grille to deck lid, with nothing extraneous, which is why many collectors call these among the most timeless mid-century American luxury cars. Buyers selecting among trims in 1965 faced a coherent menu. Calais delivered essential Cadillac engineering at attainable pricing. DeVille expanded body styles, including a celebrated convertible that paired 429 cubic inch torque with top-down boulevard cruising at 20 to 40 miles per hour, or roughly 30 to 65 kilometers per hour along ocean drives, and Fleetwood 60 Special. Brougham added formal touches like vinyl roofs and interior walnut, with production of about 18,160 Specials in 1965, underscoring strong demand for the most luxurious owner-driven sedan. It is tempting to romanticize these cars, but their credibility rests on data. Engine specifications of 4.13-inch bore and 4-inch stroke. Torque figures around 480 pound-feet, or roughly 651 Newton meters. Curb weights around 5,000 pounds, or roughly 2,260 kilograms. Lengths up to 227.5 inches, or about 5,778 millimeters, and sales totals cresting toward 200,000 in 1966. These are hard numbers that back the soft impressions owners recall. The human side seals the memory. A Fleetwood owner in 1966 might describe a late-night run on freshly laid interstate comfort control. Set once at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, or roughly 22 degrees Celsius, the V8, loping at 2,000 to 2,500 RPM, corresponding to 50 to 65 miles per hour, or roughly 80 to 105 kilometers per hour in top gear, while the car tracks so straight that long trips feel shorter, and the stacked lamps throw a clean, rectangular beam, a scene repeated across the country in a way that cemented Cadillac's post-war image. Numbers, even service minutiae, reflect the era. The 1965 to 1967 Cadillac specific bell housing pattern on the 429 engines meant transmission swaps required correct cases or adapters, keeping the driveline ecosystem cohesive inside the brand. And owners who stuck with factory gear enjoyed the precise calibration of the switch-pitch stator strategy and throttle modulator, a pairing that remains a favorite among restorers and collectors for its drivability. From a historian's viewpoint, calling the 1965 and 1966 Cadillacs the last true standard of the world has a specific meaning. It marks the final moment when Cadillac held a clear domestic technology edge. In comfort automation, a refined, big displacement powertrain matched to a uniquely capable automatic, a structural step change to a perimeter frame, and a design language of restraint, with stacked lamps that reset American luxury's visual code, while doing so at record volumes from a storied Detroit plant, built to do exactly that kind of work day after day. The 1966 tail lamp service quirk and the occasional vacuum switch maintenance for the early automatic climate systems remind us that complexity always carries upkeep, yet field experience and enthusiast documentation show these systems to be robust when maintained. Owners who cleaned contacts on the master vacuum switch or kept vacuum lines healthy enjoyed years of consistent automatic climate operation, a testament to Cadillac's engineering foresight in analog control. Long before digital HVAC arrived in the early 1980s. For the viewer asking how these cars compare in the real world, the answer is in the way they blend numbers with nuanced sensations. Yes, a top speed around 127 miles per hour, or roughly 204 kilometers per hour, and 0 to 60 miles per hour, near 8.5 seconds, or roughly 14 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour. But also the way the stator's pitch shift is almost felt in the chest, rather than heard, how the perimeter frame drains harshness out of broken surfaces, and how automatic climate control keeps attention on the road, rather than on sliders and knobs. It is also in the confidence of the lineup. A Fleetwood 75 limousine stretching past 243 inches, or roughly 6,190 millimeters, projecting civic authority on courthouse steps, a DeVille convertible rolling through Lakeshore Drive at 30 to 40 miles per hour, or roughly 50 to 65 kilometers per hour, with the 429 murmuring under light throttle, and a Caddy sedan delivering the same structural serenity for an owner who valued quiet competence over ornament. Each one a different face of the same disciplined engineering story. If there is a single hidden reason these cars endure as nearly perfect, it is that Cadillac in 1965 and 1966 balanced contrasts that usually fight each other: size and control, power and quiet, simplicity of use and complexity behind the scenes, resolving them into an experience that felt inevitable once driven. That is why when production crested at about 197,000 in 1966, it was not an accident. It was the market ratifying a product in tune with its time. And that is the lasting truth. The 1965 and 1966 Cadillacs closed one chapter of American luxury at its absolute peak. Detroit's Clark Street line humming, Bill Mitchell's stacked lamp face looking forward, Wayne Caddy and colleagues refining surfaces, the 429 and turbo Hydramatic pairing, delivering velvet thrust and comfort control, quietly keeping every mile as calm as the last, setting a standard that would be harder to maintain as the world changed. But that remains unmistakable every time one of these cars slips onto the road and simply makes distance vanish.